I was raised in El Salvador. When I was 2 years old, my parents came to the United States for a better life. In my hometown, I only had a science class, but it wasn't really informative because I didn't have enough resources to teach us science. Then I realized that coming to the United States, it was a unique opportunity that I had to take. After 3 years, when I arrived to the United States, I was in my science class, and our teacher was giving us a short presentation about the universe. And I found it really interesting, but I didn't get it at all. And then I was at a community center, and they told us about this internship at the Smithsonian that we could get to learn about the space. And you could choose like other options too, but I was really into the space. So I'd apply for it, but I didn't think that I was going to get accepted because I don't have all the background that all American kids have. And I didn't speak English that much. But then I got accepted and I was really excited for it, but I was nervous at all. When I started this internship, I didn't know anything about the moon or the outer space. But after this internship, I had learned a lot about lunar craters, the universe, and I had the chance to do stuff that most teenagers of my age hasn't done yet. I got the chance to touch a meteorite rock, and I got this great opportunity to see the blue room of the museum. What is the blue room? Not all people have a chance to go to the blue room. The blue room is the place where the museum keeps the most valuable minerals and rocks that are found all over the world. It was a great chance for me. I look at my past and I felt so important because I was in an important, significant place for the United States. And I see how far can a person get from just being an immigrant to be at an important place and be someone. With this all knowledge that I had gained in this internship, I know what I want to do. In my future, I want to look towards science and study astronomy to make this world a better place for us.
The first time I was truly uncertain about what I wanted to do with my life was on a tour of the Natural History Museum's collections. I was in a dark and dusty basement surrounded by crates, and I had the overwhelming feeling if I touched anything, it would crumble to dust. But there it was in the middle of the room, a cast iron coffin. That year of high school, I had taken an AP Art History course. It mixed two of my favorite subjects together. It was amazing. I learned different areas of art, as well as ancient art and art history, and I did projects on them. I wrote papers, and I spent the entire night compiling my paper into a small book, which I'd illustrate. And it was really fun, but I never considered it as a career, because science, that was where I was supposed to be, and had assumed I'd be since I was a kid. And I love science, and I still want to go into science to impact the world in some way. Then I saw that coffin. I freaked out. It was amazing. I schooled like a stereotypical girl over shoes. It had everything. It was creepy, it was macabre, it was art history, it was a niche piece of history, like who's ever heard of a cast iron coffin? These amazing coffins were created by a man named Almond Fisk, who wanted to solve the problem of diseases spreading due to overcrowded cemeteries. And in true Victorian fashion, these coffins were very, very creepy. Even people back then thought so. It looked like the person had been molded in a blanket of rusty metal. Some of my favorite parts of art history were when they mixed with anthropology. When I researched burial rituals, I liked learning about all the different nuances between cultures and decoding all the symbols and finding the deeper meanings. In hindsight, this is also why I love science. So looking at this coffin, a tangible embodiment of my current anthropology fixation, I could finally see where it could lead me. And then my mind went, oh crap. If art history and anthropology and museum creation meant I got to spend my time with things like the cast iron coffin all day, then I'd totally be down for that. But what about science? This year, I interned at the National Zoo, and it was amazing. So much hands-on experience, and biology and environmental science buzzed through my brain. I learned how to feed poison dart frogs and bears. I learned just how much the National Zoo does for animals like the Panamanian golden frog, which can no longer live in its habitat due to a deadly fungus. And I learned that my mild fear of birds is actually quite extreme. And here was my dilemma. Learning that Castiron coffins were basically a way to mummify a person from Deb Howalski, the Smithsonian's collection officer, was just as amazing as hands-on biology with my mentor Denny at the zoo. When I talked to my mom about art history and my dad about biology, I enjoyed both extensively. But it did help when my mom told me it was okay to be uncertain about what I wanted to do. Most people were, and as long as I was passionate, I could just do both. So my career as of now is a mystery, and new careers pop up all the time. I still want to write a graphic novel or two. I still want to be one of those people that makes the creepy puppets from Jim Henson's movie like The Dark Crystal or Labyrinth. And things like synthetic biology are still fascinating to me. I have a wide range of interests and new experiences enforce them. But wherever I end up, I hope it makes me feel the same way as it did when I saw that cast iron coffin.
I am currently a junior in high school. I am the epitome of what a good student should look like. I have straight A's. I take the most rigorous courses that my high school has to offer. I know how to be a good student. I know the process. You sit in class as the teacher blurts out a bunch of information at you, and you write down the notes, then you go home and you study them. Once you're finished studying, you take her test and you tell her exactly what she wants to hear. Then you realize that you only need to memorize the information up until the test. That's the problem with our education system. Students memorize only to forget later, knowing without understanding, because really all the teacher did was attack you with information. That's what I used to do until one day I realized that learning didn't have to be that way. This summer, I worked alongside my partner Cleo and my mentor Denny Charlton at the National Smithsonian Zoo, where I learned about the care that is put into the animals. One day, I walked through the gates and I realized that I didn't know much about animals. I had basic knowledge, like the fact that fish swam and birds flew. My partner and I would walk up to the cases and a small audience would form around us. And as that happened, we saw the curious faces. They were ready to ask us questions and they started attacking us with them. Like, what were we doing? Were we feeding them? What type of fish or bird was it? I wasn't completely confident in my education, and for once in my life, I felt out of place. How was I going to get an A at a zoo? I was only an intern. I didn't have a set of notes that I had to memorize. I was completely lost. But as we were being bombarded with questions, I realized that I knew the answers to them. They weren't research questions, but they were questions that I knew the answers to. Denny had taught us not by reading, but by walking and interacting with him. On our first day to the Amazonia house, he allowed us to walk with him, and he allowed us to feed the animals as he talked and demonstrated what they were, how we fed them. And I soon realized that as I was answering the questions of the children, that was how I was teaching them as well. The same way Denny had taught me and my partner Cleo was how I was teaching the kids. The kids were up close and personal with the animals and me. This was the way to teach. Back in elementary school, I was taught interactively until one day I was assigned a reading instead of a drawing. Why did that change? Students of all ages should be taught interactively rather than memorizing consistently. Before the summer, I was a student who knew how to memorize. Now, I'm a student who truly understands.
It was the first week of my internship, and I was in this unknown building with my mentor. In the building, they had never-ending lanes of cabinets filled with culture and history. After walking for quite some time with my mentor, I asked if they had anything from Somalia, where my parents grew up. As a Somali American, I don't know a lot about my culture. I mean, I know the language, but I don't know the customs or the history. Right when my mentor opened the two cabinets that was labeled Somalia, my eyes were greeted with a sense of deja vu. I've seen these things before, specifically a basket. In Somali, basket is called dembid. The basket that was in the museum looked exactly like the basket that was in my house. Just 12 hours ago, I used the basket for laundry, and when I was growing up,
I used the basket to play around with my brothers as a soccer ball. Later that day, I went home and I asked my mother how the basket got to America. She explained to me that my basket was my father's, and it was made by my grandmother, a talented basket weaver. She spent many years learning the complex weaving techniques by her mother, and so forth and so forth. It was almost as if I had uncovered a missing piece of my culture. It wasn't until I had to ask my own mom for information about this basket that I'd grown up with. It came so natural to me. So this was already a new concept, because even though I grew up with this ordinary thing, right when I saw it in an unfamiliar environment, I didn't recognize it anymore. It was like a new person, but I still had a sense of a relation to it. Fast forward 2 more weeks and I was back at MSc with my mentor. He was telling us about a project. My mentor, Joshua Bell, is a curator at the Department of Anthropology at the National Museum of Natural History. His fieldwork includes being an expert on Papua New Guinea, because he spent over 20 years living there and studying the lives of Papua New Guineans. The project that we were going to be working on this summer was about cell phones and the minerals and materials that they're made out of. As a person who grew up in the age of technology and who currently owns a cell phone, I never really thought about what a cell phone is made out of and where those many minerals and materials come from. He directed us to dissect the cell phone into little pieces. From there, we took the little pieces and found out what types of minerals and materials were in them. In my research, I got shocking results. Around 40 to 50 elements on the periodic table are in a single cell phone. But the most surprising thing was the journey about how a cell phone gets into a person's hands. The journey starts off with a cell phone. The raw minerals that are collected from countries around the world are brought to a certain country that is responsible for making a small part of the phone. From there, the small part of the phone, the small part is sent to a factory where the phone is assembled and sent into a different country where it's sold to us. When we're touching a cell phone, we're touching the work of boys in Congo who are working in laborious conditions just so we can get a simple device. We're touching the hard work of underage girls in China who are spending long hours assembling the phone. It was in this moment where I realized the similarities between a cell phone and a dambil. Both were overlooked items that weren't necessarily not cared for, but very common towards the people who are around them. They both had a long journey from the birth, where the materials are collected, to the moment it's in our hands. This is what cultural anthropology is. Cultural anthropology is the studies of humans and their development throughout time. In this internship, I learned a lot about myself and the world. I learned about different cultures, and through cultural anthropology, I learned how to respect and gain knowledge about other cultures that are pretty foreign to me. I mean, the dambil was something that's in my house, but the minute I saw it in the museum support center, it seemed brand new, but it wasn't. And most people do not realize how close anthropology can be.
This summer, I got the opportunity at the Natural History Museum to intern for an exhibit called Curious. Curious is an exhibit for teenagers to interact with artifacts from anthropology and science departments. This summer, I had to get more teenagers to come into Curious. The first thing I did was have to research about how many visitors already came in. I got on my computer and looked up the site TripAdvisor for reviews. The reviews that I found were surprising. A lot of parents talked about their 3-year-old or their 6-year-old coming into Curious, and that's not what it was for. So I had to talk to my mentor about a different way or different strategies we can bring in more teens. One of the ideas that I had was to give a different color scheme for Curious. Curious has a yellow and blue color scheme, which is a bit childish and not more mature. So I decided to go with a burgundy and a navy blue. It looked amazing on our flyer for a teen event that we had at Curious. Now that I knew that my ideas were going to work, I decided to come up with a bigger plan to bring a Curious cart upstairs to the rotunda. The Curious cart has 3 artifacts on it. People come up to the cart all the time, but they always ask to go use the bathroom or where's the other exhibits in the museum. So I decided to use the sack. The sack is a big screen where we can project images about Curious or any of the events that go on. We put the images in the rotunda for an event called Toku Iho to celebrate New Zealand culture. When I put it up there, a man even said that if he hadn't seen this sack cart, he wouldn't have gone into Curious. So I knew my idea worked. But one of the ideas that didn't work was the fact that I couldn't bring any of my DC friends into Curious. When I was in 1st grade, I always went to the museum, from 1st grade to high school. In the DC school system, they always make us go to the museums or to the zoo. And it kind of gets boring because you see the same exhibits over and over and over again. The DC kids only visit the museum because they want to study anthropology or science. Maybe if they had exhibits like the Narwhal exhibit, it would be a little more interactive. Imagine yourself in a room where a blue sea is projected all around you. There's narwhal noises in the back and a huge narwhal model projected above you. It's pretty cool, and I got to experience it. I want other DC kids to experience it like I did. I'm still a teen and I'm still discovering new things. So I want you to ask yourself, if you had an exhibit, what would you put in it?
5 months ago, I sent an email saying I wanted to do DNA barcoding at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. through the Youth Engagement Through Science program. A month ago, I completed the program doing Paleo Biology instead. So let's take this a few paces back to my previous summer when I did anthropology. It had opened up a newfound interest in science for me, but I had vowed to myself that I wouldn't do science again next summer because I was scared of doing something new, although I probably wouldn't have admitted that to myself back then. New things scared me, and change scared me. I kept thinking, what if I don't like it? I don't even know anything about it. And this mantra that I had going on was detrimental because I wasn't allowing myself to think positively. So you're probably wondering, what made you change your mind? And I probably wouldn't be able to answer that myself. Maybe it was when I saw the email in my inbox, or maybe it was when my friends decided that they would try it out. Maybe it was a combination of both, or maybe it wasn't either thing. But regardless, all it took was that one email to be sent for me to realize maybe this is something to look forward to. Now, the reason I chose DNA barcoding rather than paleobiology was because I thought DNA barcoding sounded cooler, and I also thought it would make a bigger impact on the world. DNA barcoding, also called genomics, meant looking at issues with mislabeling a fish, while paleobiology meant looking at tiny fossils that look like the size of a crumb. Well, fortunately, but unfortunately at the time, I ended up being in paleobiology, probably because interviewers thought I would make a better fit for the 4 spots they had available in the program. Here's why it was fortunate for me in the end. These tiny fossils that I would come to know and love are called foraminifera, but forms for short. They live in the ocean and have lived for millions of years. Like I stated before, they only look like the size of a crumb, but when you look at them under a microscope, they're so much more interesting and beautiful than they first appear. What's even more interesting about them is their global impact. I spent 6 weeks trying to organize these forms based on their types, and also finding their elemental analysis. So, if you take a look at the form I saw during my research, there are these large holes at the top of them. And these holes were man-made by a laser. So during my research, I would put them under a microscope called the scanning electron microscope. And then I would try to see if there was any dramatic changes of elements in the holes. And sadly enough, I didn't find any significant change to form a conclusion, but maybe one day we can go back to it and we can. What my mentor was trying to find from this is to see how forms have lived through time and to also see how the ocean temperature has affected them, hopefully telling us more about climate change. Although we haven't really figured that out yet, hopefully one day we can. What's funny is that I thought my research would have no global impact, but now I know I was completely wrong. There's a lot of things that people don't know, and I would have never known what foraminifera can do and what they are if I hadn't taken the risk to do this program again. What I also realized is how it can fit into my personal life. I'm an aspiring politician hoping to make a change in the world someday. And although I probably can't talk about foraminifera in my research while I'm talking without talking about foraminifera for 20 minutes trying to get people to understand, I will advocate for science and I will use this research to talk about climate change. What I'm trying to do is leave with an understanding that although things seem scary at first, the reward is often greater than what you might have originally imagined. Take the plunge and take that opportunity you were scared about doing, although it seems scary at first, and take a risk. What foraminifera have taught me is that small things can make a big impact, literally. But you won't understand that impact if you don't make a difference in the first place. So take a chance, because you never know how perfect something might end up being. Thank you.
Whenever I talk to parents, the first thing they always tell me is how impressive it is that I work in a museum. The second thing they tell me is how fantastic that work must look on a college application. I work at the third most visited museum in the world, and all you can ask me about is my college application. It's frustrating, but it makes a lot of sense. College applications are incredibly important in this day and age. Teens spend countless hours slaving over their essays, prepping for standardized tests, and cultivating the perfect balance of extracurricular activities and challenging academic courses. We miss out on sleep, social interaction, and fun, all just to have a shot at our dream school. Parents tell their kids what classes to take and what sports to do in order to make them look more appealing to colleges. Teens do a variety of extracurricular activities in order to buff out their application and beat out the thousands of other students applying to colleges across the United States. When I first started working at the museum, I had no idea what I was going to be doing or what being a youth volunteer even meant. Like many other teens, I just started working there because it was another extracurricular activity to do. I thought going to work would be just that, work. What I expected from the museum was a boring, routine volunteer position, but what I found was that I could do what I loved and make a career out of it. When I was a little kid, I would go to the Natural History Museum with my dad all the time. Most of the stuffed animals I own are from various museum gift shops. I knew the names of every animal in the mammal hall. I knew every single crack and corner of every hall, staircase, and bathroom. I even said goodbye to Henry, the elephant in the rotunda, every day before I left. The museum was my life. I actually thought I could live there with the bones and the dinosaurs and the gemstones. But as I got older, I visited less. I started focusing on school and homework and the ever-present looming threat of college. For some reason, my childhood dream just became another childhood memory. It seemed like working and studying at the museum just wasn't an option. But when I started working in Curious, a hands-on interactive exhibit in the Natural History Museum during my freshman year, every preconception I had about colleges and careers were completely turned upside down. I met countless volunteers and mentors who had once been accountants and medical students and actors, but who were now museum education specialists and archaeologists and even jellyfish researchers. Everyone at the museum was so incredibly passionate about their work. Hearing real, actual adults with a career and a life talk about their story and their path to the museum made me realize that it is possible to do what you love. Throughout my time at Curious, I've touched moon rocks and smelled mummies. I've held Malaysian leaf insects and polar bear skulls. I've met world travelers and conspiracy theorists. A month ago, I was dancing around in the rotunda in front of complete strangers wearing a velociraptor mask in order to advertise Curious. Every single day I come into work, I think, wow, I love this job. but not enough teens know what I know. During my internship this summer, I worked on analyzing why we had a lower number of applicants for our youth programs and what we could do to improve the infrastructure of our current programs. When I asked our current youth volunteers why they think teens may not be applying, the overwhelming consensus was that they believed teens were too busy working on college applications and didn't believe that museums offered legitimate career opportunities. There are thousands of young, defeated high schoolers out there who have given up on their dreams and on doing what they love. They have no idea that opportunities like working in a museum even exist. That's why it's so important that we, as people who are actively doing what we love, promote these kinds of opportunities. Working in a museum has reawoken the passion and curiosity I felt as a kid. I'm happier and I feel more confident in my life choices. All these experiences have helped me realize that you don't need to fill your application with a crippling load of schoolwork in order to do what you love. The only thing you need is passion.
I've always been the baby of my family. On both my mom's side and my dad's side of the family, I've always been the youngest. That being said, I never really got a chance to get a sense of how independent I could be and never got to take charge. But in my freshman year of high school, I was given the opportunity to work as a volunteer and curious at the National Museum of Natural History, and this summer I became a Q Crew captain intern. Curious is an interactive space within the museum, geared towards getting kids and teens interested in science through engagement and interaction. As a Q Crew volunteer, I've gotten to facilitate some of the interactive activities we have and also some of the Smithsonian collections. And as a Q Crew captain, I've gotten to mentor some of these volunteers, but I've also gotten some other tasks, one of which included creating an event called Teen Takeover. It was a recruitment event designed to get teens interested in joining our youth programs because we didn't have much of a turnout for applicants in the past year. I was given this opportunity and I thought, really? Me? I'm planning an event, an actual event in Curious? It was unbelievable that I was given this opportunity, but at the same time, it was somewhat nerve-wracking. I had to plan what the event would entail and the logistics of where everyone would be and what they would be doing. So naturally, a bunch of thoughts were racing through my head, like, what am I going to have at this event? Are there going to be classes at this event? Will they be drop-in or sit-in? Do I need decorations? Do I need buttons? Things like that. So I worked diligently for a couple weeks. I planned out the location of everything, the buttons, the decorations, and even the catering. And when the day of the event finally arrived, it felt like everything came into place. We had Teen Takeover postcards for people walking in. We had interns on the base camp and field, microscopes in the theater, forensic anthropology, and scientific illustration upstairs. We had a feedback table giving out buttons as people exited, and we had a big poster outside of Curious. Everything was going smoothly, and people kept coming in. So the fear of something going wrong started to trail away. But then something happened. One of the interns came up to me and said, "Hey, we're running out of buttons. I think we need more." So this panic and the stress started to set in again. We're running out of buttons? How many more do we need? What kind of designs do we need more of? How quickly can I do this? So I frantically walked over to my mentor and I passed on the news. She looked at me, she paused, and she exclaimed, "Oh my God, we did it! We ran out of buttons!" And I was really confused at first as to why she was so ecstatic, but then I thought about it. We had so many people coming into Curious that we needed to make more buttons to give to visitors. The fact that we had that many people coming in and enjoying the event meant that the event was going so much better than I thought it would be. So the adrenaline from being nervous turned into adrenaline from being happy and excited. I knew in that moment that this event wasn't just everything I hoped it would be, it was so much more. So I made the buttons and then I checked on the rest of the volunteers and the interns. I walked over to the Center of Curious and looked around in awe. But then I remembered that school is just about to start in a couple weeks, which also made me remember that I'm only 17 and that this was my event. But I'm going to be an adult in less than a year. I'm applying to colleges, I'm driving, and I've been in the city alone. But 17 isn't actually a young age in order to develop qualities like responsibility and independence. Yet we're not given much of a chance at schools. We're constantly looked after, we need passes to go other places, and we're given tasks and assignments with restrictive guidelines. It really isn't like the real world. And because of that, I never got to showcase just how independent and how reliable I could be. Creating Teen Takeover has given me the opportunity to do just that, but to also be confident in my ability to do these things. So while Teen Takeover served the purpose of giving teens a voice, it's as if it gave me a voice as well.
Being the shortest in my family growing up, I was constantly told that big things can come in small packages. It was a saying that the 7-year-old me fully believed, the 10-year-old me took with a grain of salt, and the 13-year-old me rolled their eyes at. Yet this summer, the skepticism that I had come to find in that sentiment was completely erased in a way I could have never imagined. Up until this summer, when looking at this, I saw what you most likely see, some lines of sand. Yet through work at the Smithsonian, my perspective was totally flipped because I found out that in these lines there are thousands, if not millions, of fossils. These fossils aren't the huge T-Rex bones that we traditionally think of. Instead, they are the tiny shells of a single-celled ocean organism called foraminifera. Now, saying foraminifera is a mouthful, so we call them forams for short. Forams date back over 545 million years. That's more than the Stegosaurus and the T-Rex combined. But when that meteor came down and wiped out the dinosaurs that we see in museums worldwide, some forams survived. But if you're like me and you don't just automatically think things that are really old are cool, all it takes to be interested in them is a look. This is a high-resolution scanning electron microscope image of a foram that's blown up the specimen over 200 times. And as an aspiring scientist, my first thought when looking at this was that, wow, these things are actually pretty cool. You can see the separate and distinct chambers that form over time. Each species of foram forms in its own unique shape, and all were made by one single cell. And not only do they look cool, forams actually matter. Despite their small size, they are a major key to unlocking Earth's past. Using their shell chemistry, scientists can recreate ocean temperatures and use them to study our changing climate. Due to this significance, forams and their chemistry have been studied to the point where we can see patterns of the past. There are even super complicated graphs of isotope levels that take me hours to decipher. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm no chemistry person. The word isotope is as foreign to me as Mandarin, but all I needed to focus on was that spike in the red box. Essentially, these forams have a different chemical makeup than all the other ones before and after it, and it just so happens that this spike is at the exact same point in time that a bunch of forams went extinct. So when we see an extinction and these strange isotope levels, we know that something had to be going on. And our question becomes what? So to solve this mystery, I, a small high school senior, was sent into a room with a microscope roughly my size and worth over $1 million. In a slide clutched in my hands were 4 haphazardly placed forams. Wearing blue doctor's gloves, I pulled open the machine, and it opened like it was some high-tech device in a sci-fi film. When I placed the forams in the microscope, I wasn't really sure what to expect. At first, I was stunned by the high-quality images it produced, like the one I showed you earlier. But soon I realized that that wasn't all this machine was capable of. It could also perform an elemental analysis. We could figure out what was actually on the shells, what it was made of. My job was to compare the inside to the outside by doing an elemental analysis across the holes. Maybe the outside had something different than the inside that could explain the extinction. And it would be totally cool to tell you that after testing, we found that, but we didn't. The inside and the outside were pretty much exactly the same, meaning that we could rule out some sort of water exchange as a cause, and the extinction's still largely a mystery. Throughout all fields of science, we can find thousands of mysteries just like this. While there's so much that we don't know about our Earth's past and our future, we can continue to study these tiny clues that the world has to offer. It's important that we look at things like forams as not just tiny shells, but instead look at what they can tell us about our world. So now, as a 17-year-old, I can definitively say that big things can come in small packages.
Hi guys, my name is McKenna Worth and I'm here to tell you about the day I learned to bridge boundaries. So I'm a high school senior. This means that the first question anybody asks me is, so what college are you going to? Or where are you applying? Or what are you thinking about majoring in? It seems like everyone else has these answers all figured out. I feel like I was expected to plan out the rest of my life over the summer and I missed that memo. The reason this is so hard for me is because I've got too many interests. I like science, but I also really enjoy performing. Writing brings me joy, but so does solving a complicated calculus problem. I'd love to learn more about anthropology or geology, but I really enjoyed my engineering class this year. And everyone expects me to choose between these. I'm supposed to pick one thing I'm interested in and stick with it for the rest of my life. Maybe my other passions will be downgraded to hobbies, or worse, I'll have to give them up completely. I didn't know how to bridge those boundaries, and I've got to make that decision right now. But I'm equally passionate about everything I'm involved in. I feel stuck. I feel like I'm being forced to choose between things that I care deeply about simply because there is not enough time in the day. And it was tearing me apart. So the summer of 2017, I decided to conduct an experiment. Instead of focusing on just one of my passions, I decided to try and make two happen. I started rehearsals for a musical called Rock of Ages and an internship at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. I wanted to be able to combine these two halves of my life into something that would represent me as a person. I didn't want to chop off the part of me that loves science, but I didn't want to sacrifice performing either. The summer began and I launched myself headfirst into both my rehearsals and my internship, but they didn't come together until Tuesday, July 25th. That's the day I learned to bridge boundaries. In 4 days, I'd be leaving to perform at the International Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, Scotland. At the moment, I was working on writing a report detailing everything I learned from all the research I'd done throughout the course of my internship. But that week, the museum was different. It was filled with performers. These performers were a part of Tukuiho, an exhibit which celebrated New Zealand's Maori culture and took over part of the museum for a full week. They captivated the audience whenever they performed. They sang and danced with traditional weapons and then explained the significance of what they were using and how it was created. Watching them, I learned a lot about Maori culture and how they prepared their warriors for combat. Here were actual representatives from the culture. You could go up and talk to them, ask them questions like, what is it you're carving? Or how have you seen your culture change in the past 10 years? Everyone involved was an integral part of Tukuiho. They brought their culture to life. So there I was, watching the best performance of my life, not on Broadway or in Scotland like I'd expected, but at the Natural History Museum, where I'd been interning all summer. As their voices filled the rotunda, I realized that in the real world, nothing is divided into departments like they are in my high school classes. You can be a performer and still be involved with science, history, and museums. I hadn't been sure if that was possible, but there's a way to combine interests into something meaningful. That's what the Maori performers did. They bridged boundaries in a major way. And they did this by performing, which is something I absolutely love to do. Not only that, their performances educated the public and gave everyone who watched an incredible experience. It was really inspiring. Now, I'm not sure what impact this will have on my whole life. I mean, I'm 17, but now I'm hopeful that I'll be able to find a place where I can do all of the things that I love to do, not just one. I'm not saying I want to perform for the rest of my life or even do it professionally at all, but it's nice to know that science and theater aren't completely incompatible. And that's what I learned from my summer internship, how to bridge boundaries between academic interests. The Maori performers did exactly that, crossing literal borders, coming from New Zealand, as well as the borders between academic areas of study, combining science and culture with performance and art, and inspired me to do the same. Thank you.